Bruce Johnson here, and welcome to the Wired to Grow show, where we interview successful business owners, entrepreneurs, and subject matter experts in order to help you figure out how you can grow a more scalable and successful business. Our sponsor today is Delegation Mastery. If you're one of those people who is frustrated because you feel like you're dumping and you're not leveraging your people, then make sure you go to www.delegationmastery.net. Our guest today is going to be Mark W. Richards. I love it when people use their initial. Mark is a serial entrepreneur here in Charleston, South Carolina, and he has a passion for creating innovative products and services. And he started over a dozen businesses in a wide variety of different industries, everything from short-run corrugated boxes to high-performance boat design companies. His first company was started in 1990, where he created the capacity to I think it was hazardous waste containers, right, in the transportation industry. And his primary business over the last 17 years or so has been PolyCleanUSA. In addition to all that, he's also an investor and an entrepreneur mentor for people here in the Charleston, South Carolina area. So without further ado, Mark, welcome to the Wired to Grow show.
Oh, thanks, Bruce. Pleasure to be here today.
Hey, I'm excited for today. Now, before we dig in, you got to give us a little backstory, because people who major in philosophy and minor in poli-sci usually don't end up becoming entrepreneurs. So you kind of have to help us. How did you go from poli-sci philosophy all the way over to entrepreneurism?
I'm not sure how anybody survives with a major in philosophy without being an entrepreneur. I think you'd be dead by now. You wouldn't have any food on the table. It's Bruce, I'm one of those people who's just fascinated with everything. So if you send me to a liberal arts school, it's a very dangerous place to go because there's so much to learn.
Right.
And I found myself in my third year of school with a mile wide and an inch deep with my education.
Gotcha.
And I had taken business, and I had taken chemistry, and I had taken anthropology, and I had taken journalism and art, and I had this incredibly fun time for a couple of years, and realized I was in desperate need to eventually get out. So the philosophy major came from nothing more than one. I loved philosophy. I really enjoyed it. The classes I had taken, particularly logic classes and some of the Aristotle type stuff.
Right.
But I got to the end of my college time frame that I had to get out of school, and found myself without a concentration on a whole lot. So going through the student manual, I found that philosophy as a major only required 27 hours in the discipline to get the degree. That's it, sold. So
how all great decisions are made.
Oh yeah, Dad said get a degree. He didn't say what in. Is the biggest mistake he ever made. So I managed to get out in the 4 years, I promise. Well, 4.5, and ended up with a degree that I used to be embarrassed by, actually, Bruce, because people say, "What, it wasn't an engineering degree. It wasn't practical," in quotes. And so what I used to, I was a little embarrassed by it, but eventually I realized the philosophy is probably the perfect degree for an entrepreneur. It teaches you a love for learning and having the discipline to read difficult stuff. Mm-hmm. And comprehend, or read and comprehend difficult stuff. It teaches you to be okay with ambiguity, mm-hmm. because once you start delving into philosophy, you realize that the black and white that you had in your youth, particularly in your teen years, right, goes to more and more shades of gray. I won't call it quite 50 shades of gray, but you have all these shades. There's
another conversation.
Yeah, that's right. The black and white's gone. You start seeing the ambiguity of things, mm-hmm. and becoming comfortable with it. So instead of life being this or that, it's a lot more and. Mm-hmm. And now my snarky response to people who give me a hard time about it is, look, when I get sick, I can hire a doctor to take care of me. When I have a financial problem, I can go to my accountant and have my accountant take care of it. When I have a legal problem, I can go to my lawyer and have my lawyer take care of it. But I can't hire anybody to think for me. And philosophy taught me how to think.
Yeah.
There's my reason for philosophy and how I ended up where I am.
Okay, so in general, philosophers tend to think they're the most rational person in any room. So,
I don't know about that.
So what do you think you learned from your courses in philosophy that you think helps make you a better decision maker now?
Hmm. I would think, looking back, I think it taught me a love of reading non-fictional work.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think over the years I've read 3,000 or 4,000 books.
Mm-hmm.
I've got over 2,000 in my library.
Right.
With digital, I don't even count them anymore. In fact, that's a little interesting. I've started to go back to physical books. I'm finding digital books aren't really doing it for me. But
mm-hmm.
I've read every one of the books in my library, and some of them multiple times. And it's just open. When you read a book from somebody else who's done something interesting, you get to pick their brain
mm-hmm.
At your leisure. And if they're still alive, you can reach out to them and ask them some questions. A lot of times they'll answer.
Right.
So I think it's been just the knowledge, the vast knowledge I've gained from reading and a love for reading that came from philosophy more than anything.
Well, philosophy, love of wisdom.
Right, there you go. That's right.
Well, the benefit of having some Greek and Latin in the background, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt.
No.
Okay, so let's go back to 1990. You're working with your dad, and you come up with an idea. Why don't you tell our listeners how you got started on your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, this is a great story because it's the lesson I learned is one that I try to teach other entrepreneurs. And so I'll give the story, and then the lesson, I'll really clarify the lesson.
That'd be great.
At the time, I with my graduated degree in philosophy, I was working with my dad. My dad was building artificial reefs for the state of South Carolina. It's the coast of South Carolina. You go out 20 miles, it's only 60 feet deep. It's mostly sandy bottom. So the South Carolina Department of Wildlife, Natural Resources, they contract to have things put on the bottom of the ocean that we would normally scrap or discard.
Okay.
So this an old tugboat, a barge, concrete culverts. It's a wide variety of things they dump on the bottom. The idea being that the structure creates a haven for fish. Little fish come in, they hide. The bigger fish come to eat the little fish, and the bigger fish come in the whole 9 yards. So we're basically artificial reefs.
Okay.
When around the time, about 1989, 1990, Hugo had just come through and done its in Charleston, and we were working on an old boat called, I believe it was the Comanche. I think it was an ex-Coast Guard cutter.
Okay.
And what our job was with the government was to clean it up, to make it environmentally safe to sink. These boats, they had oil in them and nastiness that accumulated over 50 years of service, and it all seems to end up in the bottom. And cleaning out the bilges, the muck in the bilge, and we were using glad bags. Those are heavy-duty bags, and they weren't heavy-duty enough. They were just, we would fill them up, and we'd start to lift them out with a crane, and they'd break, and they'd make a bigger mess.
Right.
So my first invention was nothing more than a really strong garbage bag. And I thought I had something. And I said, well, if we're doing this hazardous waste stuff, maybe somebody else might want it. So picture a big, hefty sack is what we're talking about, the size of a regular garbage bag.
Okay.
Just made super strong. So I call up a company called Fennel Container, local company at the time, started by a gentleman named George Fennel, very successful local entrepreneur. And I called up his company, and I spoke to a gentleman named Bob Shepard. And Bob Shepard's done well on his own as well. And Bob said, yeah, come on up. We always want to see something new. So I went up to see Bob. It was August. It was one of those hot August days. And went up there to see him. He had a meeting, couldn't do anything with me. So he had me meet with a guy there named John. For some reason, the last name escaping me. It will come to me in a bit. John Chapman. And John I have this thing all packaged up neat. It's a garbage. How well can you pack up a garbage bag? But I had a label on it and everything. And I show it to him just in the package. He goes, we already buy those. My heart sunk. So if you can't beat them on innovation, what do you beat them on, Bruce? Price.
Oh, okay.
So I said, Johnny, how much are you paying for these things? He goes, I'm taking $27 a piece for them. Now, Bruce, I got a garbage bag in my hand. I'm thinking $2 or $3, and he's talking $27. And I just slid it off the side of the table and said, Bruce, Johnny, what are you paying $27 for? He goes, I'll show you. And it turns out it was not what I brought up there at all, but it was a liner for a roll-off container. 22-foot long container, 8 feet wide, 4 feet high. And I went out there and looked at it, and I measured it with a tape measure.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, if I can beat the price, will you buy them for me? And Johnny said, you know what? It's our philosophy as a company to always buy local of anything. So that's the good testament of George Fennell.
Right.
And so I went back to my apartment. I was living in a little apartment west of the Ashley, the only time I'd ventured off of James Island. And I heat sealed. I had this little heat sealer. It was a Vertrod sealer. It was a Navy surplus heat sealer. And I was heat sealing this 22-foot bag with 12 inches at a time with a plastic sealer. And the liner was so big it wouldn't fit in the apartment. So I had to take it out on the lawn. And it folded up. And my neighbors are looking over the balcony. It's an apartment complex. And it just confirmed that I was the crazy guy living in the unit.
Exactly.
So the next morning,
which, by the way, I think is one of the primary requirements for entrepreneurism.
Oh, yeah, a little bit of nuttiness.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So the next morning we go up, and it's one of those August mornings in Charleston where you're already sweating at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And it's just miserable, no air movement, hot. So I go up, I meet with Johnny, and he's very gracious. We go out and we put this liner in this container. And the first words out of Johnny's mouth were, hey, this thing fits better. I said, well, is that important? He said, yeah, because when we go to dump stuff in, it won't pull the sides in.
Right.
I said, that's awesome. I said, he goes, how much? And I said, $25. I still wasn't confident enough to be at 27. He goes, sold, I'll take 100 of them. And I'm like, how the hell am I going to make 100 of these things in my apartment? at 12 inches at a time. But that's how, that was our first customer, and that was our first order. And the whole lesson learned there is the stupid thing I had come up with was nothing more than an opportunity to have a conversation with the customer to find out what they really wanted.
Well, and you made a big pivot real fast.
Oh, good Lord. When somebody's willing to write you a check for something and it's within the wheelhouse of something you can do, boom, off to the races. That has happened every single time with every one of my ventures. It's been a pivot off of what we originally went out to do, and we found a better opportunity. Well, but just having the piece of crap, so to speak, gives you an opportunity to have a really good conversation.
Exactly.
So
you mentor and help entrepreneurs. A lot of them have a very hard time pivoting like that. What do you think holds them back?
I think they've read too many books about how they have to be super focused on one particular thing. They put the blinders on, or they're just flat out stubborn. And I learned this with Seed Charleston. We very early on, if somebody pitched us for money, we would automatically throw a wrench. We'd throw them a curve. We'd say, well, what about such and such, or this or that? And if they were absolutely obstinate about not at least exploring the maybe, never give them any money. There's no way, because they're going to fail. That the original idea will, the chance of it being successful is so minute that it's almost uncalculable how minute it is. All you're doing is you're just starting so you can go find out where the real opportunity is.
Right. So most people are so in love with their product they can't pivot because they're in love with it.
Absolutely. The other one that drives me crazy is the inventor that comes to me and says, I've been working on this for 10 years. I'm like, nope, I don't want any part of that either. Because anything that somebody's been working on for 10 years is crazy. There's no other way to put it. The world's changed. Look what's changed in the last 10 years in this world. I mean, Google was just an IPO 11 years ago. You can't be working on something in the physical world for 10 years and still have it as a viable product today.
Yeah.
So.
Now, what's interesting, and we'll come back to this with PolyClean, you have a love for manufacturing.
I do. I love physical products.
Okay. If you think about a lot of entrepreneurs, when they're thinking about starting something, a very small percentage of them think manufacturing.
Absolutely.
Right? Probably because they're thinking about capital and human capital investments. So if you were to pitch some people who are listening to this around the world and say why you should consider manufacturing, what would your pitch be to them?
Well, first of all, it is very difficult. Software is infinitely easier in a couple of reasons. One, the physical world, to bring an idea from the head, which is just an idea, into the physical world, the difficulty comes because it just takes time. It takes time to go from idea to molecule. Whereas with software, you can iterate something a lot and get a lot of feedback a lot faster. It just takes longer in the physical world. But the reason I love manufacturing is I think the future is going to be the blend of software and electronics embedded in what we consider done products. I mean, this is already happening so fast in our world right now. I'm not even telling anybody anything that's an epiphany. I just think there's just a really cool opportunity to create better versions of things people are already looking for and to surprise people with stuff that's physical as opposed to software. I just think there's a better opportunity.
Yeah.
It's not as hard as it used to be. It's just not. I mean, there's so much excess capacity of manufacturing in this world that if you have a great idea and you know how to design something, you can work with people to get anything you need made anywhere in the world. You don't have to make it yourself. You can do your assembly yourself, but you don't have to. You don't have to own a sewing machine. You don't have to own a plasma cutter. You don't have to own a 5-axis CNC machine. It's all that's already out there, and there are people out there begging for good ideas to run on those pieces of equipment.
Yeah, very cool.
Yep.
So going back to that original lesson, when you're you change your price from a couple dollars to $25, right? You learn something about price elasticity then. If you were at the Harbor Entrepreneur Center and you were meeting with a couple mentorees, people in the cohort, and they were asking about pricing, and you were to say, you know, based on my 25 years of experience, here are 2 or 3 lessons of things I've learned about pricing, what would you say?
When we look at a product to launch into, we try to figure out what we would have to create to be the highest price in that category. Mm-hmm. I think the 2 places that are healthy to be, or from a business long term, are either to be the highest priced and the best version of something somebody's looking for, or to be an absolute low price, the rock bottom price, because people do care about price and it is a competitive advantage, but make sure it's sustainable and it's not just going to be a race to the bottom as somebody else matches that. If that's the only thing you have and you don't have a long-term sustainability with that, you're going to be in trouble. I think the worst place to be is in the middle. Mm-hmm. With an undifferentiated product, just slogging it out. I think those are the people who make the tiniest margins, if any margins at all. So.
Yeah. So you got your first company going. Then in whatever is 97, 98, you decided to start PolyClean.
About 99.
99, yeah. Okay. So when you started PolyClean, okay, I'm sure that when you're 8 years old, you weren't thinking plastics, resin removal. I want to do that someday. So you got to help us. How did that happen?
No, that's true. I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, Bruce. When I'm 70-something years old and doing something, it won't be anything I've thought of right now. I can assure you that. So are you asking how I got PolyClean started?
Yeah.
That's another crazy story. So we were, at the time I had a company called Transbulk, and we were manufacturing liners for containers for transporting plastic pellets.
Okay.
So at the time, that was a pretty cool product. We would take a 40-foot or 20-foot ISO container. That's the ocean-going containers you see in ships. We would put a 35-pound plastic bag in there. It was really interestingly designed. We would inflate it, blow it up like a balloon inside the box, the container, okay. And then in about 10 minutes, we could fill that liner full of granular product, primarily plastics. Mm-hmm. So if Eastman Chemical, as an example, they were a large manufacturer of polyester at the time, PET. There was an intermediate resin called terephthalic acid, TPA.
Okay.
And Eastman made all their TPA for all their PET plants that were all over the world. They made all their TPA in Kingsport, Tennessee.
Okay.
So they had to transport it around the world. Well, the most economical thing to do was to buy one of our liners, which cost $100, weighed 35 pounds, and they could ship 45,000 pounds of material in it.
Wow.
We just turned a box into a bag in a box. Like a big box of cornflakes, we just made the bag that went inside. A company called Trex approached us in 1998 about liners. Mm-hmm. And what they wanted to do, they manufactured plastic decking. So this is a composite decking material that you put on the deck in your backyard.
Okay.
It's made out of a homopolymer like milk jug plastic, mm-hmm. Grocery sack plastic, blended with wood flour, and it extruded out in what looked like a board. Okay. At the time that company had sales so much, they couldn't keep up with demand. It was insane. They had more sales than they could take, and they were just scrounging around the world trying to find recyclable plastic, and they were having a hard time. So they were so desperate, they were actually looking to bring recycled plastic in from Europe. Europe was much further along in the recycling world in 98, 99 than we were. So they approached us about providing them liners to send to Spain to ship recycled plastic back to the U.S. so they could use in their plant in Winchester, Virginia.
Wow.
And because I can't leave well enough alone, Bruce, I went up to talk to them. And I said,
that's because you got messed up in those philosophy courses.
That's right. So I was just intrigued by their business model and what they were doing. I wanted to learn about it. So I went up there and I met with some of the executives. And they said, they made an offhand comment. They just said something offhand. Yeah, we have a lot of plastic that comes to the door that we have to turn away because it's dirty or it's wet. I said, well, how much? And they said, well, about 20, 30% of the truckloads of stuff that come here we just can't use. And they already have a problem. They want to take it. They absolutely want it. They just can't use it in their process. So I said, well, what if we set up a wash line up here in Winchester, Virginia, next door? We'll just, everything you can't use, just send next door to us. We'll clean it up, send it back to you.
Okay.
They go, absolutely, we'll do that. And I'll give you a 20 million pound PO right now. So here I am again. And so now we go to look for making a wash line for polyethylene. And I'm not the best math guy in the world because I'm a philosophy major. But the cost to build the plant was around $3 million. And my cost of capital, just the cost of capital, not paying anything back, just paying the interest, was not going to be met by what they were willing to pay for us to clean plastic. Right. So I backed off on that. I said, no, that's probably a bad investment. It would have been. But while we were doing all that, we uncovered this really cool equipment. It was originally used to sort rice. And it was an optical sorter that sorted rice. And the company that sold the equipment came to us and said, hey, y'all ought to get in this business of taking one of these pieces of equipment and sorting plastic. I said, why is that? And they go, well, we get calls all the time for people wanting to rent the equipment. They don't want to buy it. It was this sorting equipment. They just wanted to rent it because they just had a small problem. And he said, your customer Eastman called us the other day. They had 200,000 pounds of contamination, and they just wanted to rent the sorter. He says, I think if you buy one of these sorters and set up a plant, you'd get a lot of business. So I said, okay, well, how big is the sorter? And it turns out it was 4 feet by 4 feet by 6 feet. Not very large. And I said, well, why don't we just put it in the back of a truck? We'll just take the sorter to them. Instead of them shipping 2 million pounds or 200,000 pounds or 2 million pounds to us, we'll just take the process to them.
Right.
He said, that's a great idea. You should do it. And that's how that project got started. We called some companies out there in the world in the plastics and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. And they said, absolutely. As soon as you get it built, come see us. And I think to date we've sorted 700 million pounds of plastic.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a lot of material we've seen over the years. So it's been a cool company. Not a huge company, but a very good company. And
again, what a cool start. Just being open to the opportunity presented.
Oh, we still do it today. I mean, we're building. We build all of our own equipment, and we've built based on customer feedback. We built a drying truck. We're getting ready to build a blending truck. One of our customers said, "Hey, do you guys blend material?" And we said, "How much material they got?" And they said, "We have 10 million pounds a year." Absolutely, we blend. And, we'll be blending in 30 days. Yeah. And so we just jump into whatever makes sense. I mean, typical entrepreneurs, create anything for $1, and as long as it's fun. It's got to be fun. It's got to be super helpful to somebody.
Right. So. Well, and your ability to act fast is pretty remarkable.
It's ready, fire, aim. We make decisions very quickly, and we're right about half the time. So, yeah. It's better odds at Vegas playing craps. But, we have a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, what do you think holds so many entrepreneurs back from taking faster action?
Fear of failure, absolutely fear of failure. I mean, you can mentally prepare yourself. Yeah, I'm okay with failure. It's tough. I don't like failing. I mean, I don't like doing it. But if you look at it, everything you do as an experiment and not really as the end of the world or whatever. This is an experiment we're going to try it for 30 days. This is an experiment we're going to try it for 60 days. And protect your backside. Don't go all in. Don't go all in. Just protect ourselves. There are very few things you can do which you can't undo. You know, you can't, don't go so far down the path where you're stuck in it. You've got these fixed costs that you can't get yourself out of. Figure out a smart way to experiment with it. I'll tell you, a brilliant person for this, and somebody I would love to pick the brain on one day is Richard Branson, Virgin.
Right.
Richard Branson. Yep. When he started Virgin Airlines, his whole staff at work, when he owned Virgin Records at the time.
Right. And
Virgin Records was doing very well, and they were mortified that Richard was going to buy a 747 and fly across the Atlantic and compete against British Airways, who'd been doing it for years.
Right.
And Richard said, "I'm going to do it." And the way he did is he called Boeing and said, "Look, I want to lease a Boeing 747, but I want you guys to agree to take it back in a year if it doesn't work." And he got them to agree to take back a $60 million airplane if it didn't work. And so he knows how to protect his backside. And that's what every entrepreneur should do. Set it up so it's an experiment. Go out there and try it. If it doesn't work, nothing. You know, you've learned something, and but you can still play the game. You're not out of the game.
Are you familiar with Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach?
Absolutely, I love Dan.
Yeah, Dan has a great line along that. He says, "You never lose unless you lose the lesson."
That's true. That's absolutely true.
Right.
Yep.
And if you're thinking about that way, then you can make an experiment, and if it doesn't work out the way you want it, it's okay. It's just part of the process of making you better. As long as you're learning, it was well worth the time.
Yeah, we do it all the time. I mean, I've actually gotten to be a pretty decent engineer without having any formal training in it, particularly in electrical and electronics. And the way you do that is you blow up a lot of stuff and you make sparks fly. And as long as you don't kill yourself, you're going to be fine.
And you still have your hair.
That's right. For most of it, it's rapidly going away. Employees do this to you.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. That's pretty funny. Since you just brought up employees, over the years you've hired a lot of people. So you've probably acquired some good lessons, some bad lessons about hiring. So if you were to give entrepreneurs a couple of your best thoughts about hiring, either what to do or what not to do, what would you say?
Gosh, I'm first of all, I'll admit I am not good at it. That's one of those things I'm just not particularly good at. The reason for it is I can see opportunity in every human being. Mm-hmm. I see it. Unfortunately, a lot of my employees don't see it in themselves or haven't done it themselves. And so I want for them more than they want for themselves sometimes. And that's a really bad trait to be as a manager and somebody who hires somebody. So I haven't been very good at it. I will say where I've made my biggest mistakes is not doing my due diligence with somebody at a critical level, not checking their background, but taking their word at face value, being bamboozled by a pretty decent charisma and a good personality, which are very important to have a good personality. Right. And not, or to somehow attract deeply flawed individuals into my life, I would say.
The law of attraction.
I will pick up the puppy off the side of the road and try to nurse him back to health, and he will bite the crap out of me. It's happened so many times, it's almost a joke. So I don't have, there's great books. Top Grading is a great book.
Yep.
If you follow this, back to that ready, fire, aim, I'm go, 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 go. And my nature is not to go do all that background stuff. But I've had some great hires too. So I've gotten really lucky and I've gotten really unlucky. And I still call it a crapshoot. I don't care how you do it.
Well, you kind of brought up the mistakes here. And in our pre-interview just before here, you'd mentioned that you'd had a couple of failures along the way. What did you learn from, pick one or two of those and kind of give us a story and what lesson you got out of that?
Yeah, I'll do two. So it's one thing to bankrupt a company. It's a whole nother ball game to bankrupt two in the same day. And,
you should get an award for that.
You have to do a pre-trial thing with the judge, and the particular day, ours was the only business bankruptcy in there. There were a lot of individuals going through bankruptcy privately, and I didn't have to go through individual bankruptcy. It was just business. But I'm the head of the company, and I have to go there, and I have to swear that we're telling the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth,
right,
with regards to the bankruptcy. And I sat there, and the judge asked me some questions regarding the bankruptcy of one company. And then he said, okay, we're done. And then he calls the next company, which was also my company. And I'm just sitting there. And the judge looks at me and goes, you can go now, Mr. Richards. And I go, no, that's mine too. He goes, oh, we got a 2-for-1. And yes, sir. The companies were so intertwined financially, there was no way to separate them ethically at all. And so we said we just got to take them both down. My lesson there is at all costs, avoid lawsuits. If you can avoid a lawsuit, there's no good coming from it. Whether you're on the defense side or you're the suer or the suee, if at all possible, try to avoid them. And those companies were brought down over lawsuits that we quote unquote won in the court of law. 13-minute jury verdict. I mean, we literally went to a jury with the most ridiculous, arcane business stuff. And they hated the other guys. They loved us. But in the end, we ended up losing because we spent an enormous amount of money on that lawsuit and had nothing to show for it at the end but a hollow victory. So I avoid the lawsuits if we can. And it brings up a good thing. Really strong agreements in writing tend to create an environment where you don't have very bad disagreements because everything was in writing.
Yeah.
So, particularly when it comes to partners.
Yeah, it's a tough lesson that most people learn, early on, is usually because they messed up, right? When things are good is when you need to put everything in paper, write it out instead of waiting.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, that's not my nature, right? So,
hey, we all get along.
Let's go, let's go start this whatever venture together, and then you find out, one of us is not doing what they need to be doing. So,
yeah.
And I'm sure if you talk to them, they would have their feelings about it too, right? Everybody has their side.
Exactly. Two sides of everything.
Absolutely.
So when you look back over the last 16 or so years of PolyClean, and you're trying to evaluate, what were some of the best strategic decisions you made over these past 17 years? What would be some of the good decisions you think you've made?
I think really getting good at doing the mobility.
Mm-hmm.
What we learned early on was you have the demographic of somebody and then you have a psychographic.
Right.
So the demographic of our customer, we deal with the world's largest petrochemical companies, but no petrochemical company has ever bought our services. It's always been somebody within that company that says, hey, I need what you've got. I have a problem, come help me. So it's people to people. I don't care if you're business to business, doesn't mean anything to me. It's people to people.
Right.
And so we normally deal with an engineering type person in companies. And, their psychographic, their demographic is they're generally white males in their 40s or 50s. But that's one thing. And that's fine. We know who they are. But what we found out early on is these guys crave to be in control.
Mm-hmm.
And since we come on site, we talk about, hey, we're on site. You're in complete control of the process. Your quality control people are doing everything. You can see everything. You haven't sent your material out to some mysterious third party that you don't know what they're going to do with
right.
it. And so we planted that fear in their head a little bit about, hey, and so our competitors really, they all have fixed.
They're bad. Yeah.
They're bad. You send it. Who wants to send anything to West Virginia, right? And I'm thinking my buddy up there in West Virginia is going to give me grief about that. Yeah, so we put that in their head, and we do offer something interesting. We come to them, we really do. We drive up, we bring our stuff, and I think that strategically from a business, that's been unique and it's been sustainable for a long period of time. Nobody else has duplicated it. So that's been a good one. I think that's been a good one.
Yeah. So the real competitive advantage for you is mobile.
Yeah.
And you allow them to own the process.
Sure. Absolutely.
Excellent. Now you just were talking about selling, not company to company, but really person to person.
Mm-hmm.
When most entrepreneurs are getting ready to start a company, the thought of going and pitching and selling something to a Fortune 500 company is intimidating. So how would you help break that down? Because most of your clients are Fortune 500 petrochemicals. So what advice would you give them?
They got to get past the fear, one. They're dealing with human beings. They're tough. These businesses, here's what you're dealing with when you deal with a large company. There's a reason people work there, because they have some security. It's a secure place to be.
Right.
don't ask them to do anything that's going to jeopardize their job. So if you have something completely crazy out in left field, you have got to find an advocate that just loves you and is just willing to take a chance on you. And that's tough to find in a big business, in a big company. It's hard to find that champion, but it can be found. If you're not good at sales and you're an entrepreneur entrepreneur wannabe, hire a great sales guy. Absolutely find somebody, partner with them, and make them a fortune. I'm a decent salesperson. I just don't like doing it. If you put me in front of somebody, I will pitch. I'll pitch you. I'll sell you. I'm a strong-willed guy. I can sell well. I just don't like getting on the phone, and I just don't like making the first phone calls. So every time I've been successful, I either partnered formally or informally with great salespeople who are willing to go out there and do it. And it's been a great relationship. I like to be the little geeky guy in the back inventing all the stuff, and they're the ones in the front dealing with the customers.
Right.
And they have the temperament for it. I don't have the temperament for it.
Exactly. So most of your companies, you usually end up outsourcing to or hiring somebody who's going to actually do a lot of that sales work for you.
No, we have salespeople at PolyClean. We have our salespeople. Yeah, and my partner in PolyClean has a great sales guy. He's probably one of the best in the world. And when I did Transbulk, I had a great guy working for me that did sales. I mean, every business I've had that's been successful, there was a great salesperson there making the sale.
Excellent. Now, in PolyClean, I know you write about having some core values. You have 4 core values. There are a lot of companies that don't do anything with their core values. It seems like for you, they're kind of important.
Yeah.
Right? Not just something you did in a strategy session. I'm a strategy guy, so I hate it when people don't do anything with their core values.
Sure.
So for you, what have you done to try to ingrain and create the culture around your core values?
Well, it's hard to teach somebody those values. I mean, you've got to find them with them a lot of times. And then we've always got to walk the walk and just talk about them a lot. We've gotten big into strategy. We're on a big growth spurt right now. We're trying to work some things out. In the past 2 days, I've let go 2 people that weren't following the values, and probably waited way too long for that, because there's 3 or 4 more, and we're a small company. There's 3 or 4 more that need to go, or needed to go too, because of similar actions that we're doing. That just we would be horrible for us for them to go right now. So we were having to kind of eat some crow and put some systems in place, and do all the stuff that created the environment where this activity took place. But it's a never-ending thing to constantly talk about them, constantly reinforce them, and then act them to yourself so that you have the moral high ground in everything you do. So you've got to live them yourself, and then that trickles down to the people who work underneath you. But you still got to keep your eye on them.
Well, and to me, that's always kind of the key test, right? If you're willing to let somebody go because they're not following your core values, it means you actually own them. They're not something on a piece of paper.
And we waited too long. Bruce, I absolutely know that one of the heads that rolled yesterday should have rolled a year or 2 years ago. So it just we knew what was going on. It was not horribly egregious, and but once the door of fraud cracks open a little bit, it just gets a bit wider and wider and wider. So
yeah,
and everybody knew. Everybody knew.
Exactly. And then when you let that person go, the other people are kind of like, well, I've been waiting for you to do it for a long time.
Yeah, they were like, hallelujah. Yeah. So.
As a consultant, just a side story, but most of the time when I end up getting hired, usually within the first month or 2, somebody gets let go. And not because I tell them, it's because the owner has known for the last year or 2, and someone just said, why are you tolerating that? And they go, I don't know. It's kind of like, you know it, you just got to execute on it.
I think it's when you're in a smaller company, your resources, everybody's busy.
Right.
There's very little slack going on. And if somebody's been with you a while, they have a certain skill set that's not easily duplicated in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they know it.
Right.
And they'll take advantage of it. And they'll go, well, you can't get rid of me, because if you do, you're going to be in trouble. And they're right. But at some point, you're like, you know what? We've gone as far as we can go with this road, and you've got to go. And we'll just take whatever chances.
We'll take the hit, exactly.
Take it and move on.
Yeah. Now, in your work with Seed Charleston, one of the things that you and Patrick Bryant, who was interviewed earlier on the season, both talk a lot about is scalability. So when you're looking at an idea, how do you determine if an idea an entrepreneur has is scalable or not?
I have an interesting philosophy that probably differs a little bit from Patrick. Well, I don't know if it would differ from Patrick. I do look for a product that's scalable, meaning that more than one person in the universe has the problem, and normally the person that's being solved with the widget or whatever. Right. Normally, the person who has the problem is the person who came up with the idea, right? And so, if that's the only customer in the world, then they've got a problem,
right?
I don't know that I think scalability is such a huge issue early on. I think it's just having something to go have the conversation with to where you can find a scalable product. And I'll give you an example of that. We had somebody, and I will have to. I'm gonna talk about this so generally it's almost going to be worthless because I don't want to implicate the person who's involved in this. We had a person come to us with a really interesting idea that they wanted to create a software product to solve, and it was a real problem, and it was a real opportunity, and the software was going to cost $500,000 to create. It was fairly complex. And Patrick and I were both in this together, and we said, let's make a non-scalable version of this, because the $500,000 software would have been scalable. We could have gone from one customer to 1 million customers, no problem. I go, no, why don't we just do this? Put up a really pretty front end, right? The Wizard of Oz.
Right.
And then let's put a person behind there pulling all the levers to make it work. But don't invent all the levers. Don't create all the software to make the levers work. Right. You do the work, or we'll hire a little group of people. Not little people, a little group of people.
Exactly. You're not hiring Oz behind the curtain.
Yeah. That's completely not scalable.
Right.
You can't, because you're having all these people that are going to be doing all the magic behind the scenes. But what you'll learn is you'll learn all the real issues that happen as a result of the transaction, and then you can create really intelligent software. Otherwise, you're creating software based on assumptions. Classic example of this is a great story called prototyping. Prototyping. Back in the day, IBM was asked, this was back in the day, 50s, 50s, 60s, IBM said, please create a computer that I can dictate into and it'll type what I have to say. We want to get rid of the secretaries. Right. And IBM was pretty smart because processing power was extraordinarily limited back then and extraordinarily expensive. I mean, what we have $900,000 worth of processing power in this, $500 phone compared to back then. Right. And so what they did is they set up an experiment, and they had a computer. They put up a computer screen and no keyboard, and they had a microphone, and they would have the executive dictate into the microphone. And lo and behold, as he talked, the computer screen would show the words coming up. It was like magic. And then the executive realized pretty quickly he really didn't like this because he didn't realize how much his secretary was doing to fix the crap that was coming out of his mouth. So that was number one. Number two was he had no idea that on the other side of the curtain was the secretary typing what he was dictating exactly as he was saying it. And it was so brilliant. It's such a brilliant experiment because IBM knew they learned something from that. They didn't go out and spend $1 million developing the system. They just created a really cool experiment, right? And that, I think if entrepreneurs did more of that, they would be super successful. They learned so much stuff they wouldn't even know where to begin. Just create. How do you prototype something? How do you make something that looks usable, even though behind the scenes it's just complete garbage? Duct tape and on wire, I say.
A very clear, minimally viable product with strings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, mentally viable, where you're torturing the word viable, torturing and maximizing the minimal.
If you look in the dictionary, you're on the far end of being able to describe viable.
Yeah, if it's got to be glue and tape, it's barely glued and taped together. It's yeah, that's what I would say to start with.
Oh, that's funny. So in your work with C. Charleston, people are pitching you, Patrick, regularly. So when you're looking at the pitches and someone wanted to pitch something to you, you probably have some lessons. You said, okay, don't do this and make sure you do this. So what would be the do's and don'ts that you would say based on the people you've watched come in front of you?
The first thing we tell every one of them Well, we do a couple of things that I think is fun. Well, Patrick and I both say we're going to take a shredder to every one of these things, and if they hand us a business plan, we're going to run it through the shredder. Make confetti out of it right there in front of their eyes, because that's the most worthless thing they could do with their time is to create a business plan in the beginning. That's just it's just worthless. It's just not. I don't think it's any value to it. I think the first thing we really tell them is that half the crap that comes out of our mouth to them as advice is wrong. We're 50% right and 50% wrong, and we don't know which side we're on at any moment. So discount anything we say. The only people that matter are potential customers. Right. And you can come in and you can say, hey, I got a great idea, and we may agree with you, but until the market tells you or a customer tells you yes or no, then nobody really knows the answer.
And actually hands you money, even more important.
Yeah, the check. They hand you a check, and it clears the bank.
Exactly.
Not just hand. That's right. then you have something, and that's somebody you need to be listening to.
Right.
I guess that's it. And the other one too is if you're very rigid in your thinking, there's nothing wrong to be focused to a point. I think it's you have to have the flexibility to pivot when somebody says, "Hey, I'd rather have such and such," and you just go out and make the such and such. So,
one of your ideas in one of your posts that you wrote had an interesting idea about using negative reviews as a generator of ideas. You want to share that? Because I thought that was somewhat original.
Oh, I don't know how original it is. It's funny, I had a conversation with my trainer this morning about that. We created a little product called Quad Hands. It's we do a lot of soldering at our facility, and if you do any amount of soldering with wires and electronic components and stuff, you realize pretty quickly that it's very helpful to have a fixturing device to hold what you're soldering. Okay. You got a soldering iron in one hand, solder in the other, and you need just. So if you go in the marketplace, you buy these things called helping hands.
Right.
And the cheapest helping hand out there is $6 on Amazon, free shipping. I mean, I don't even know how they do it. I mean, it costs more to ship the thing for Amazon than anybody's making on the product. It's
right.
It's a piece of garbage. It's a $6 piece of junk. It's tiny. It's just, right. It doesn't work. And so we said, how can we make a better version of this? And so one of the things we did, we knew we wanted to make a better version of the helping hands. Mm-hmm. And so we went on Amazon and we saw the good, the bad, and the ugly with reviews. And we saw a product that looked interesting, we would read the reviews. And reviews are very interesting. The people who don't like something don't like it because they're mean or bad people. They're just disappointed.
Right.
They're mad because they're disappointed. They really had their hopes up. And they were disappointed. Mm-hmm. And if you read the reviews, you can learn so much about opportunities to create a better version of something that person's already looking for. And they'll tell you exactly what they want if you can read the reviews properly without getting emotional about it. And that goes for negative reviews on your products or whatever. If you can not get emotional about it, there is a lesson to be learned. Now, there are some people out there just mean-spirited and there's nothing you can do for them. But it doesn't mean you can't learn something from them. And you might not be able to make them happy. They're the impossible task there. But you can learn something from them. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Actually, I just wrote a blog post recently called Never Be Defensive.
Hard to do.
Right. But for that very reason. Because you'll have the ability to evaluate if it was a good or bad critique. But you have to be open that there might actually be something in there they're saying that's correct or you can learn from. You can't do that if you're being defensive because you're not listening.
Oh, you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. But what a great idea to encourage people to look at reviews, because if I'm hearing you correctly, you're basically saying if you want to create a differentiated product, find what other products aren't doing and create the thing that's different than what everyone else has out there.
So I think, yeah, absolutely. And so I've got a company called Alphidia. We're starting up this new company called Alphidia. And what we want to do is we want to do product development, rapid product development using agile software development techniques like Scrum.
Right.
So if you're in the software business, you know what Scrum is. If you're not, we'll look it up. And so it's just a way to get stuff done fast.
Right.
And I want to apply it to manufacturing. I think there's a huge opportunity, and I want my designers of the products to actually be on the shop floor while the products are being produced, because I think there's a huge disjoint of, hey, we can produce it here in the United States and we can ship it overseas.
Right.
you're not, you can't. You've got to be. I think the best engineers for developing products are going to be the ones that are on the shop floor. Toyota knows this. If you design cars for Toyotas, you have been on the shop floor. You've spent a lot of time there. So I think there's some opportunities there. And what we're looking for is we create better versions of things people are already looking for. Now that flies in the face of what Steve Jobs says, hey, if I wanted, you know, he wants to build things people don't even know they want yet. Yeah, it's not exactly true. People want better versions of things. And there's some good breakthroughs there. Now, what does better version mean? Better can mean a lot. It can be a better price, better feature, more features, less features, better color, you know, whatever. Something better. But one thing, here's the curly thing, that when somebody looks at that product or looks at that software or looks at your creation, they see it.
Right.
And focus on that and highlight it and really make that stand out. And that's going to be a very successful, that could be very successful for somebody. That's right there.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
the one thing that makes your product different from anybody else's. And make sure that's important to the customer, not to you.
Exactly. And Steve clearly understood design.
Yeah, and so back to my story about Helping Hands, we developed a Helping Hands device that's $50. So we're next to a $6 one. There's a $50 one. We can't keep them in stock. So on Amazon. So having the time of my life doing it, I want to do 100 more like it. Having fun with it.
That's awesome. Now, you had mentioned earlier on that you had read a couple thousand books, right?
I could turn the computer right now and show you the wall of books up here.
We're in the same ballpark, by the way.
Okay.
I dumped over 1,000 books before we moved, and I've got 3,000 left here. So, similar deal.
It's Bruce.
So, what have you been reading lately that you think is kind of interesting or has your brain running in overdrive?
There's a brand new book out called Bold.
Yep, by Diamandis.
Yep, absolutely great book for an entrepreneur wannabe or somebody who wants to get into this. And I think just because you cannot help read that book without it triggering something in your head about, yes, I see an opportunity there. It talks about Kickstarter, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing in a way that I don't think anybody's really talked about. That's one. The other one is The One Thing. Okay. I can't remember who wrote it. It's one of my electronic books, and I'm trying to get away from. I think I'm going back to physical books a little bit more because for some reason. But The One Thing is a good one, and I think it's not yet recognized how significant this book is. But there's a guy named Vern Harnish who's written a book, Scaling Up. Absolutely, get Scaling Up. If you're in business already, get Scaling Up. Do not get the electronic version. Get the printed version of it. And there's a reason for it. If you can get both, but you'll appreciate what I'm telling you if you get both. And then
well, the diagrams are going to be infinitely easier on that in a physical book than in your Kindle.
And you can write in it, and you're going to want to take notes. You're going to want to live in that book for a long time. And Vern has given an enormous amount of his expertise in that book. And yes, they're trying to sell consulting services like anybody with a book these days, but the book itself has plenty in it, plenty of fodder for you to keep yourself busy without having to hire anybody.
Yeah. Now, do you have a regimen, a routine? Do you tend to read a certain amount every day? Do you tend to read here and there? Do you tend to read on the weekends? What's your routine? Weekends
are very important for me to read. I'll sit on the back porch of our house and look at the water and do a lot of reading every morning. I read every morning. So I get up, I exercise 3 days a week with my trainer, and then the other days I'm drinking coffee and reading, catching up. Before I don't even look at email until later in the I may send emails, but I don't look at them early in the morning. Email. I hate email.
I know. For those who don't know, he just wrote a post called "Email Sucks."
Email sucks. It does. It's the worst form of. I'll tell you some stories about this thing. We won't go too far off on it. Email is when somebody sends you an email, they're putting something on your to-do list.
Exactly.
And you're like, what the heck is this? And then if you get a lot of emails like I do, and I'm sure everybody on here does, I'm not special in that regard. Everybody's just wanting something from you, and that's fine. And you have to say no. You have to say no a lot. And you have to be really comfortable saying no a lot. And so I think email has become the de facto to-do list, and I think it's horrible. Now, if you go back to the 50s and 60s and look at movies, and you see the executive sitting at the desk, and it's normally a dude, the communication device he uses is going to be a telephone, and it's going to be off to the side. He's not going to have the phone sitting right in front of him waiting for it to ring, right? It's going to be off to the side. It's a tool for him to use. And in front of him is a calendar. That's how he schedules his world. It was the calendar in front of him, and then the phone, the communication. We don't do that anymore. We use email as our calendar, as our way to get stuff done. It's impossible. It's just not. It's not even doable. If you don't put it in a calendar, you might as well not even have it on a list anywhere.
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend. I'd mentioned to you earlier, I used to pastor church in a previous career, and I said to a pastor recently, he said, you will never understand what it used to be like back in the day when I started, which was no one could get to you, right? You had to get through the secretary to get to you,
yeah.
and then you'd give them a call back 24 or 48 hours later on your time. But now you can't do that anymore. Right, you don't have gatekeepers. Anyone can get a hold of you.
That's true. And texting is getting just as bad now because everybody's figured out, well, nobody answers email for a day because we're all learning to control email. So the average text is answered in 45 seconds. So now everybody's texting. Well, don't text me because you're going to get an answer when I get a chance to answer. And I'm not being snooty about it. I'm hyper focused on something, and the whole world turns into chaos around that focus.
Right.
You have got to be comfortable with making a big mess in this world if you want to do anything, because you've got to focus on something. You got to focus on. Well, when you focus on something, everything around it is just going to have to be left undone. And so, if you're not comfortable with that, you're gonna have a hard time with chaos. You got to be very comfortable with ambiguity and chaos, and hopefully the people around you, you'll eventually hire really good people to clean up your messes.
That's awesome. I just realized what time it is, so I want to be aware of your time too. So, last question. Based on what you've learned over the last 25 years, if you could go back and speak to the younger version of you back in 1990, based on what you've learned the last 25 years, and you could give younger you one or two pieces of advice, what would you tell young Mark?
I've had an extraordinary life, and I've done a lot of really cool stuff. And I've gotten myself to a position where I'm very comfortable with who I am, and I'm very comfortable with my knowledge, and I'm very excited about the future. And I think the key to success is always to have a bigger tomorrow than you're today. I think Dan Sullivan talks about that.
Right.
And but if I were to go back 25 years, I would just tell myself to go with the flow a little bit more with regards to how things pan out. Mm-hmm. Because I tend to tilt at windmills more than I should. Meaning, if there's an easy path to take to make success, I will try to go off the path a little bit just to explore the more interesting path. The more interesting, maybe the path that needs some more jungle clearing to get through.
Right.
And I'm telling you this, and as I'm telling you, I'm not even sure I would have heeded that advice had I had this Mark gone back, because I have had so much fun on those weird paths that I've taken that seemed difficult at the time, but that's made me who I am. So I don't know what I would tell myself. I'm really happy where I am. I don't know that I would want to change anything.
Yeah.
So
the philosopher says, enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. It's, yeah, I'll leave it with two things. I think goals are ridiculous. I have goals, but I think they're ridiculous. And I think passion is overrated. I think passion is the thing that is politically correct for somebody who's already made a ton of money to say, do something you're passionate about. Because they can't say, I was really damn lucky that I ran into this thing and I was born with $1 gazillion and whatever. Or my mom knew somebody at IBM and I created Microsoft. You can't say that because not everybody has access to that.
Right.
But everybody has access to passion. So you tell them, hey, be passionate. I think passion and goals are overrated. I think the key to success is to create really good systems. So have a really good system for how to do something, and once you have the system that repeats itself, you're going to do very well.
That's awesome. Well, this has been totally enjoyable. If somebody would like to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you? You
can email me. Good luck.
Well, and you're not going to give your number so they can't text you, but if they did want to get a hold of you, which one of your sites would be best?
LinkedIn would be ideal. Go to markwrichards.com, which is my blog, and you can contact me through there. LinkedIn's awesome. I think anybody in business that's not on LinkedIn is missing out.
Right.
I'm never on Facebook, so don't try that. But you can go to markwrichards.com. You read my blog, read a little bit about me, and you can contact me through there.
Okay.
And I'm interested
What about Seed Charleston?
Seed Charleston's fine too, although we push most Seed Charleston people all the way over into the harbor.
Okay.
So the harbor's become our de facto test them out before we talk about giving them any money type of thing.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Mark, this has been great, a lot of fun. For those of you who've been listening, I hope that you found this beneficial as well. And if you have, I hope that you'll subscribe on whatever platform you're on, whether you're on iTunes or Stitcher, etc. And don't forget, as we're kicking this off, to give us a 5-star rating. That would be great. And make sure you tell other entrepreneurs, wannabe entrepreneurs, other business owners about this podcast. So, and if you want to get a hold of me, finally, make sure you can get a hold of me at www.wiredtogrow.com. And until our next episode, Bruce out to your accelerated success. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bruce.